And a similar topic, as Kim said, but slightly different angles. So the title I chose for this talk today is Data Visualization as a Cultural Technique. So probably also from the previous talk you heard that data visualization as a technique is quite laborious, right? You need a lot of technical, maybe also design knowledge to actually realize data visualizations. But behind that realm of the realization, there's also a broader context of how we can place data visualizations within our society, what their role is, what their premises are, but also maybe also what their limitations are. So this is probably my broader scope of my research, and Kim was super kind to already introduce my background, which fortunately enough was really fitting to provide different angles to this whole scope of data visualization. So I studied media informatics, I got a grasp of the technical foundations of what it actually means to manipulate data, to process data on a computational level. Then I studied design to actually get an idea, and also Kim and I, we studied together and really came into this trend of data visualization that was already 10 years ago. And everyone was speculating, felt like almost like, yeah, really experimental and free space to explore this discipline. But both disciplines, the computer science part, but also the designerly part, weren't really providing me with the answers for my inner questions, like why do we actually design? What are the limitations of design, and so on. So I choose a PhD in media informatics, like media theory, like coming from more humanities-based questions to actually searching for some of those questions I had in mind. And we will talk about some of them during the talk, but I think I chose some sort of like provocation setting maybe for this input talk I have for you. So we will be mostly looking at some images of data visualizations to maybe present my idea of what I think is the cultural realm of data visualization. And this realm comes maybe with the idea of bringing an alternative story to what data visualizations are and what their intention is. So yeah, maybe starting with the first slide. My first statement would be data visualization is no novelty. In fact, it has been established as the central medium in which we discuss contemporary issues and problems. And already you can see in the background, and I guess most of you, if not all, were heavily affected by those processes have taken place. On the left-hand side, you can see a rather absurd image of the COVID-19 pandemic. Was quite one of the early attempts to grasp the situation, to get an idea what is actually going on. Like, how are the infections developing? Like, what can we actually do as a society to react to this new situation? So we already decided as a society that data visualization should be taking this role. They are our instrument to navigate through this new scenario and find certain also politics. So we all remember maybe flatten the curve as a strong political narrative to navigate and circumvent other developments that are maybe not wishful. On the right-hand side, you see images from the IPCC report. I guess it's from last year. And similar, I guess, attempt. Like, we are using images not only to communicate scientific insights and what we already know about the situation, but also to take political actions. So this could be the scenario in the future. So we have to take care of it now, or in this case, reduce emissions. And that's super interesting for me as a visualization researcher, that we already, we are not discussing the role of these images anymore. We are taking them as like the central political argument in these discourses, which is for me a strong point that part of a of our culture already. I don't know what the regularities are, but if you have any questions at any time, feel free to jump in and let me know. Second, maybe provocation in the sense, and that differs, I guess, from most introductions I know, is that I think and suggest that we should think about data visualization as a medium that has always assisted humankind since the very beginning. They have always been part of human orientation and organization processes. And the next slides will all be about this bigger development, but just to give you some small examples of what that could mean. So on the left-hand side, Aninex Sanders, one of the earliest cartographic representations we know, roughly 500 before Christ. And yeah, vastly differs from our modern perspective on the Earth. Second picture below, it's a compass, a little bit later, but still serves this idea of orientation. And here we also see a big trend in visualization, that we are not always looking at flat images, but also at tools like this compass, which is like this mechanic, which can be rotated and so on. So this whole field of physicalization nowadays is rediscovered, I would say, in the visualization field, but actually has been the very foundation of this cultural activity. Of course, you probably are familiar with like cartographic representations, which also have a long history. Prominent type or kind is the Waldsee-Müller-Karte from 1507. And next to its like formal qualities, like super impressive and detailed map, it's also known for being part of, like, not the reason, of course, but like one instrument in the colonization of America. So on the top left, you will later see a bigger picture. You can see like this empty spot. And yeah, from a Western perspective, there shouldn't be no empty spots on the map. So it's all about conquering the map. Next slide, or next image, is early excerpt from Sigmund Freud's research about melancholy, and he is known for structuring his knowledge via diagrams. So before writing any text, he was a fan or supporter of like diagrammatic practices, in the sense that I don't know if you can decipher anything. It's in German, of course, but you get the idea. We're talking about data visualization as research artifacts, epistemic artifacts. So the idea is here to gain knowledge, or to gather knowledge, or to reorganize knowledge in a sense. But then part of this maybe darker side of the cultural history of data visualization is also that visualizations were abused or misused for acts of violence and abuse. So what we see on the top hand right is a diagram from the National Socialists, and they use diagram to promote their racial ideology, but also not only to organize, but also to instrumentalize concentration camps. So in the end, a huge part of this process of genocide. And to bring contemporary example, found it really funny because when it was released 2 years ago, the first image of a black hole by the Event Horizon team was always claimed as a photograph. But of course, it's not a photograph, right? I mean, there were terabytes of data processed. So many engineers were involved in this process of making this picture happening. And there's so many subjective decisions that led to this image, which I would say is like, yeah, really ridiculous effort to come up with this image. But of course, it's not a photograph. It's a really meticulous data visualization. So within the slide, you already get a brief idea that we cannot only understand data visualization as a contemporary technique that was maybe that is maybe accompanied by these new sources of computational and numerical data. Then and following techniques that we developed to comprehend these masses of data, like big data, and according maybe, I don't know, machine learning techniques and so on that serve this purpose of handle this big masses of data. Prior to that phenomena, we already had cultural techniques of dealing with data, maybe of a lesser degree, but you get the idea. So I'm proclaiming, hence we need to understand data as a cultural technique. In their combination of theory and practice, they affect us as we affect them. And I probably won't talk too much about the theoretical foundation of the cultural technique as a concept. Maybe so much that's like very much coming from a German conceptual background, mainly informing German media theory. Names that would be allocated to this idea would be Friedrich Kittler, but the notion I'm citing mostly from is what you see below, Sibylle Krämer and Horst Predekamp. And they're really defining cultural technique as a human intervention that is on a symbolic level. So we are not talking about, I don't know, industrial or agricultural techniques. We are talking about symbolic techniques. It's an act of communication. So related cultural or other cultural techniques would be reading, writing, painting, and so on. So in this legacy, I put data visualization. And the interesting part about their concept, like there as a German media theorist, is that there's a stark differentiation between the practice and the knowledge about this practice. I don't know if you're familiar with this philosopher Gilbert Ryle, but he had this differentiation between knowing how and knowing that. And cultural techniques are known for the strong premise on knowing how before knowing that. So we do know how to make visualizations, but we mostly don't know so much about like why we're actually doing it, or we want to gain more knowledge about a certain thing, right? So there's a lot of knowledge about like the craft, but as similar to other cultural techniques, they always predate the actual outcomes. For example, maybe another, like in reading and writing, it would be before you, I don't know, get an idea of the concept of peace or freedom, you actually have the words that come together and then form this idea of this concept. And in this relation, we can also understand data visualization. So really, they serve no purpose, they create purpose in this sense. And yeah, as I said, shouldn't be like a theoretical introduction, so I want to show you more pages that prove this point. So I decided to show you some pictures of the history of data visualization with the aim of broadening the understanding of both these strong pillars of this concept, like on the one hand, data and visualization, and really broaden these up. So as shown in previous slides, like cartographic visualizations are always a good example of how certain cultural motivations and ideas also change. So for a long time, we were occupied with this idea of world maps within this OMT schema. The whole origin of the Earth was mostly communicated via data visualizations or these diagrams. So we see here an example by Hartmann Schedel. And it's a series of images which tries to explain the creation of Earth, of course, like a theological visualization in the sense, which again, in diacritic terms, tries to explain what's happening to us and how we can orient ourselves in the world. We already saw the, or I already talked about the Waldseemüller world map, and here you can see on the left-hand side the this gap in North America a bit closer. I hope the quality of the images is fine. And then next to the idea of orient ourselves in like the world and the universe, where are we actually coming from, where are we meant to be, where are we placing ourselves, we also used humankind used visualizations to also do inner mappings, like what's happening inside the body. And here you see, yeah, different periods of those inner mappings. And yeah, maybe without further details going through these genres, I would like to present you. And with these inner mappings, we already also see an increase of this scientific usage of diagrams and data visualizations. So Albrecht Dürer for anatomical visualizations, Robert Flood for astronomical visualizations, Dennis Diderot tried to make this first Wikipedia-like system of our knowledge. So he tried to gather all of the known scientific data and try to create this master taxonomy of every knowledge known at this time. And this legacy also counts the work of Joseph Priestley. He did this historical mappings where he tried to compare or visualize the development of certain empires within the world, but also and simultaneously visualizing the geographical outreach of each empire. And so you have these super interesting and super complex visualizations, at least for this time. And similar approach maybe by Friedrich Strass, 1804, where he tried to visualize certain geographical movements of certain settler groups and empires and how they merged and emerged. Really just meant to not explain every visualization, but rather as a illustration of different approaches why we're actually doing or did visualization. And then a strong point that is in some historical readings also seen as the starting point of the so-called golden age of data visualization is the upcoming of statistics. Like with the invention of nation states, we suddenly had access to more formalized ideas of data gathering, like who's earning what, taxes, and so on. And these kind of economic factors led also to a huge gathering of data that was suddenly accessible. And we see some of these examples being visualized by William Playfair, for example. But I always like to show second example by Friedrich August Wilhelm Krohm, who did this super complex, I think it's almost 4 to 5 dimensions which are portrayed in this visualization. So super complex. We have like a double y-axis, but then we also have this rectangular visualization, which is then linked in a network style almost into the circular arrangements at the bottom. So super interesting graphics to look at, and probably also way more complex than most visualizations we are looking at today. Also, a historical popular example to look at is a visualization by Charles Joseph Minard, who traced a march by Napoleon. And the novel part here is that he not only displays the geographical movement, but also the size of Napoleon's forces and how they developed over the time. So this, again, the novelty in combining multiple data assets together. And maybe another example, which is super interesting because it also includes a different medium format. So the name is Etienne Jules Marais. And on the left-hand side, we see a rather typical example. It's a time visualization of public transport. I guess these are train stops and how. So basically a different visualization format of like the timetables we know from our bus stops or train stops. But at a certain time, he also made himself familiar with like a new technique that developed at this time, namely photography, and thereby he was able to visualize something which was not visible before, namely human movement. So with like photography, you could suddenly make these movement patterns visible, and yeah, made a huge impact on epistemic questions at this time, and still to this day is influential for this kind of vision or image-based research practices. And again, I showed the golden age in the 18th and 19th century based on national economic factors, but we also see an uprising of social studies. So not only the individual, as in Etienne Jules Marais' case, but also how can we grasp our modern society as a formation within terms of data visualization. So we see a lot of visual techniques that are accompanying probably something we would now call empirical social sciences, sociology, and so on. And what I always find fascinating about these cases is that there is a certain tendency to make a point that like this whole history of visualization is always like nurturing towards this idea of innovation. And so what you're seeing in the background to prove this point is yeah, in the end, a data visualization about the history of data visualization by Michael Frantley. And it's a super fascinating graph for me because like, what do you define as milestones in the first hand? And these patterns of density, right? And this golden age of which we just saw examples. So here history becomes some sort of like accumulation of novelties, but there's no idea of critical reflection in regards of what was actually portrayed here. Like who was responsible and how were data visualizations really located in this process. And I will later talk about this really particular angle of how to portray data visualization, but maybe I'll talk about the examples and then it maybe gets a bit clearer. So I have 3 examples to prove this point, maybe like a counter visualization to Michael Frantley's visualization. We, in the last year, see a rediscovery of a sociologist called W.E.B. Du Bois. And he made, especially for the World Fair in Paris in 1900, a exhibition where he tried to portray the cultural achievements of quote-unquote American Negroes. And he really tried to make a social political effort here. And it was the first time he created data visualizations with his team. So he chose the technique of data visualization to portray this really urgent political issue. And you can see on the left-hand side, like where they were portrayed in the exhibition. So they were not just like any part of the exhibition, they were like on eye level, right? This was like the center point of this exhibition. We also see photographs, we see literature and other artifacts to promote the cultural achievements. But there really was a stark focus. But what we learned like beneath like this and on the back you can see like these are really like super interesting graphs in terms of formal arrangements. They are breaking with certain norms that were developed, like graphics almost remind of Bauhaus, which came 20 to 30 years later. So really remarkable in the sense. But we also have to see, like from recordings, we know that W.E.B. Du Bois was super disappointed by the resonance of this exhibition. Like nobody was talking about the data visualizations, and it had, as we also know, no political effect of accepting Black people even more into society. So he stated for himself that his usage of data visualizations failed, and he never did data visualizations again. And coming back to this graph is maybe my counterpoint. So we rarely, or I rarely within my research found points and historical research that is making this full picture, but rather is focusing on this formal inventions and formal successes. And I don't know, maybe, of course, it's legit to tell the story via these formalized things, but maybe we also need different perspectives on the history of data visualization to get a full picture about, yeah, what is data visualization about. Similar stories can be told about Florence Nightingale, who maybe slightly had, from a modern standpoint, problematic ideas about who her medical treatments were for, like not everyone. And not going into details, maybe also Jon Snow's graph, which is always a showcase for, so Jon Snow map is kind of this master case, master example for social empirical sociology. In this case, he showed the outbreak, the geographical outbreak of a cholera illness in a certain part of London. So the story here is that via the map, we learned about this disease. And via the map, we were able to find the source of this disease, in this case, water. So at this time, it wasn't known how diseases actually spread. And via this map, we could actually learn there was like water leakage. And this was the whole reason how the disease spread. But what we ultimately learned through other historical data now is that the actual visualization came years after this accident. So we have to see here that data visualizations are maybe not always like this instruments that help us to challenge certain problems, but they are also a means to narrate these problems, right? So really a different angle in this historical alignment and super interesting case. Looking at the time, just want to give you some more examples about maybe also artistic approaches to visualization. So far we all just talked about theological interests, religious interests. We talked about economic interests, political interests, but of course we also have a aesthetic driven strength of data visualization. And one school is really close to the idea of diagrammatics and the German Bauhaus. Namely, you can see here Walter Gropius diagram of the really basic structure of the Bauhaus itself. So not only were diagrams created within the Bauhaus courses, but they were also structured by diagrams. And on the right-hand side, you can see one teacher of the Bauhaus, Paul Klee, also working heavily with diagrams or data visualization as an artistic practice. So I see here a really strong identification point for artistic practices within this legacy of modern art, maybe. And this is also where we see a rich variety in different media where data visualizations can take place. So we saw this illustration on 2D on paper, but we can also relate the idea of historical development of data viz to the medium of textile and weaving. And in fact, when we see data visualization as a technical medium, we can place the first technical realizations of data viz to these weaving machines. They were already programmed in a way to think about programming now in terms of computing. So these examples from Annie Albers on the right-hand side, right from another Bauhaus teacher. And on the left-hand side, Barbara Stepanova, who came from, yeah, maybe the so-called Russian Bauhaus for Kutamas, and yeah, placed in the same time, 1920s. So we really see a rich discourse within diagrams, within art at this time. Even there were diagrams about the art historical development about art. So this is a really famous, probably you've already seen this kind of genre diagrams by Alfred Barr. Funnily enough, like for him, is a strong origin point is the Bauhaus, but not the Russian Forkutemas. So again, we see this historical tendency that yeah, certain things are made prominent, certain things are left out, and this is deciding how the story is told. So the really subjective nature of diagramming becomes clearer. And then we see a really rich involvement of diagrams in research practices. A favorite example of mine is Abi Warburg, who is an art historian, and he is known for coming up with novel methods about thinking about imagery, comparing imagery, and his novel approach was that he was combining ancient imagery types and comparing it to modern image types like advertising. And that was really, novel at this time, that you could compare between high and low culture, maybe. And he created these massive atlases, as you can see on the left-hand side and in detail on the right-hand side. And this is, for me, a showcase for diagrammatic practices in research. Again, yeah, maybe skipping over this one, it's quite well known, Otto Neurath, and so this educational legacy of diagrams. We already talked about the close relationship of right-wing ideology and diagrams. Here just some examples of maybe more contemporary examples of artists that work diagrammatically, and not always with the result of a diagram, but in this case, it's really close also to the formal language of diagrams. So two female concept artists, Hanne Darboven and Jenna Horwitz. And then slowly going more into this direction of what we are discussing today as data visualization. So like a origin point of this data visualization is made with the invention of, the computer coming more mainstream. And then we can probably locate practices like the new upcoming computer art, software art, as a close process to data visualization. And one name that frequently comes up when we talk about like pioneering computer art and software art is Frieder Nake, who did this plottings. So he programmed like a device that made a pen draw. And as we saw, and again, proves my point of this legacy that is continuing. One of his most famous plottings he did is called Hommage à Paul Klee. So a strong reference to this modern diagrammatic practices we already saw a couple of slides ago. And then similar tendency, Yannis Xenakis, not a software artist, but a architect and musician, used data visualizations and diagrams for composition. So he used diagrams to create some of his 12-tone music pieces. So I don't know if you are into complex and serial music, but this is basically the graphical foundation for these, or could be a graphical foundation for these kind of music. And similarly, to complete this picture of music, also dancing knows diagrammatic influences, known as, for example, the Banish movement notation on the left-hand side and the Eshkol-Wachmann movement notation. Two approaches to generate new approaches to dancing, and to this art form of generative dancing. And just to complete this picture of this artistic string I wanted to make, and two artists I quite like and that influence my perspective on data visualization Julie Meretu on the left-hand side. These are meant to be mappings. So these are personal mappings of places of her childhood, for example. And on the right-hand side, you see mappings, diagrams by Johan de Vogt, who in the beginning of her career dealt with the translation of scientific pieces. For example, I don't know if you're familiar with the sociologist Niklas Luhmann. She had a piece or a series where she tried to translate his theory into diagrams and made these kind of abstract paintings. Then I skip over the software art examples and just make my broader point about how we can maybe, after we've seen these historical examples of data visualizations and yeah, these different avenues it has taken, right? From geographical, organizational, political, medical, educational, and so on, to maybe the contemporary language of a variety of digital imagery. And I don't know, I made this slide to maybe comprehend for myself where I would locate data visualization within this recent realm. And just an attempt. I don't know if you agree, but this is kind of my taxonomy of placing data visualization in this idea of images we use to access the computer systems we use on a daily basis. So, of course, we do have classical graphical user interfaces. These are also data visualizations in my understanding, but these are highly formalized and they are made for this purpose of data manipulation. So you go to your Finder, you change data files and so on, you know, the cultural technique of this sort. Then in the middle, I would place data visualization mostly as maybe formalized data projections. So here there's a different, in the background I already had some illustrations to show what I mean. So more maybe practices that are geared toward legibility and so on. So readability, something we discussed previously with the COVID and the climate graphs. And then on the very end of the spectrum, maybe less formalized, but really data heavy, even maybe data narratives. And here would place this whole realm of images that are created for video games and the accompanying imagery. All right, so that was just a suggestion to structure this realm. And of course, we don't only use data visualizations to access our computer systems. We also use diagrams and data visualizations to reflect these systems. And a artist that is well known for this reflective mode is Vlada Miola, who uses, as part of his artistic research, data visualizations to decipher this whole complex of the material, conceptual, and all the included foundations within like computer systems. In this case, he deciphered an Amazon Echo speaking device. So this would probably be a good stop point for this historical framing of visualization. I have some slides where I would like to maybe summarize this perspective on cultural visualizations, but maybe we, I don't know, tackle these questions first. I don't know. What would you say, Ken?